Yesterday, the Vatican announced that Cardinal John Henry Newman, who was canonized a saint by Pope Francis, is going to be declared a doctor of the church. Now, this was met with the sort of mixed reaction that you might expect. A lot of people were doing cartwheels, other people were not so enthusiastic. Now, I'm not going to take a side on this personally. I will just say that the divide on this is between those who just love to see a canonization on one side, along with basically on that same side, the people who are big fans of Cardinal Newman, including some traditionalists. Dr. Kwasniewski has a big defense of Cardinal Newman. But on the other are people who point out that his development of doctrine has been, at the very least, misused and misappropriated by the modernists to implement all their terrible ideas. And the fans of John Henry Newman have a retort to that, which is fine. But here's the basic details. Vatican announces today that Pope Leo XIV has decided to make St. John Henry Newman a doctor of the church. And they have the English statement. On July 31st, 2025, the Holy Father, Leo XIV, received an audience His Most Reverend Eminence, Cardinal Marcello Semeraro, prefect of the Dicastery for the Causes of the Saints. During the same audience, the Holy Father confirmed the affirmative opinion of the plenary session of cardinals and bishops, members of the Dicastery for the Causes of Saints, regarding the title of Doctor of the Universal Church, which will soon be conferred upon St. John Henry Newman, Cardinal of the Holy Roman Church, founder of the Oratory of St. Philip Neri in England, etc., etc. So he is being canonized. Well, he's been canonized. He's going to be made a doctor of the church. The negative reactions include saying that he is essentially was the guy who opened the door to the crisis in the church, which might be a little bit of a distortion because the church was already in a theological crisis at the time of Cardinal Newman. There were councils of the church. Well, we'll call them magisterial acts meant to counter synodal councils at local places that would push all sorts of bad ideas that became actually embraced by the Vatican, at Vatican II, and other such things. But it's a complicated issue. You should be aware of it. You're going to see debates going on about it. One of the things you're not going to see too many debates on, and I don't know why, is this amazing story here. It's our main story for the day. Comes from Vatican News under the headline, Catholic digital missionaries and influencers share hope at Jubilee event. Hundreds of digital missionaries and Catholic influencers from around the world have gathered in Rome for the first ever Jubilee for Digital Missionaries and Influencers, a 2-day celebration aimed at fostering communion, deepening mission, and sharing hope through digital platforms. Now, to be clear, I don't have a problem whatsoever with the church using cyberspace to spread the gospel. Whenever a new communications technology is developed, the church should find a way to use it unless there's something intrinsically evil about it, and the internet is not intrinsically evil. However, I really detest here that the Vatican is actually talking about this stuff as missionary work. Your Catholic YouTubers, unless they're priests or religious, are not engaged in a ministry. It's not an apostolate. It's not a ministry. Anybody who calls it that really should rethink what they're doing. It's fine for people to do essentially a 21st century version of what Chesterton and Belloc were doing 100 years ago using printed mediums. They were out there talking about the state of the world, a little bit about the state of the church, but mostly the state of the world, giving a Catholic response to it. But they didn't call what they did an apostolate, and they didn't call it a ministry. So we should really refrain from using that kind of language. I don't call what I do here an apostolate or a ministry. And there's plenty of room and plenty of examples in history of laymen engaging in the kind of work here without trying to elevate it up to some kind of ministry of the church. It gets really weird really fast when you see it. People should try to remember their places. And it's unfortunate that you've got the Vatican endorsing that kind of language. That's not really the main problem here, though. That's just the tip of the iceberg. Part of the Jubilee of Youth held on July 28th to the 29th, Jubilee for Digital Missionaries and Influencers, promoted by the Dicastery of Evangelization in collaboration with the Dicastery for Communication, brings together those who evangelize online to reflect, pray, and celebrate together as one church without borders. Seeing that language a lot too, by the way, this without border stuff. In the opening remarks of the event held at Rome's Auditorium Conciliazione, Paolo Ruffini, prefect for the Dicastery for Communication, welcomed participants, inviting them into a sacred space of listening and encounter. It is beautiful to be together in person, he said, noting that while digital platforms unite us, what truly binds us is not the web, but something that transcends us, God himself. He reflected on the fact that the church has always been a network long before the internet existed, and that this network is one made not out of code or content, but of persons, imperfect, diverse, yet united by one baptism and one faith. He urged those present to resist the temptation of self-promotion and superficiality, and instead to reflect on their mission with humility. That is a very good cautionary thing for him, because the influencer culture is frankly detestable. And I say that as a guy who gets on here and communicates ideas to people, so I guess that makes me an influencer. But you may have noticed that people are getting really tired of influencer culture, where you'll suddenly walk around, be minding your own business, and someone shoves a camera or a camera phone in your face to get your ideas on things, and you get pretty clearly that these aren't, survey conductors or a pollster or someone from the mainstream media, that this is some person who's just got a TikTok channel or something that they're promoting themselves with, and that they may use your interaction with them in a selectively edited video to try to convince you that like 99% of Americans, for example, don't know what the capital of the country is or other such things. Always view that kind of stuff with suspicion. And there is certainly a Catholic equivalent of it too, and that's a very big problem. But this is what was happening in Rome, and some high-profile Catholic commentators got there, including Michael Lofton. I've already mentioned that in the past. I don't generally speak negatively about other Catholic commentators. Not a big fan of what he does, and I'm certain it's mutual. But I'm hoping he's, finding what he was hoping to get out of the situation. But there's an undertone here to a lot of this. And the Vatican has for years been trying to find a way to curb the influence of the online Catholic commentary world. Back in like 2018 or 2019, they actually floated the idea of giving like influencer badges or something, some sort of thing that people on the internet, including like media outlets, could have prominently displayed on their pages to show that they were approved by the Vatican and approved by church authorities, so that good Catholics won't listen to others. If you can believe it. Think of it as a digital imprimatur, okay? Imprimatur. Now, this whole event is just bizarre. Well, Anthony Abad of Avoiding Babylon posted this on X. This is Cardinal Todd, as he said, leading the chanting of the Pater Noster, that would be the Our Father, to influencers while they stand in the Orans position. Not to get to one of the more tired but classic debates about the Novus Ordo versus the traditional Mass. The Orans position is where the people have their hands up like the priest. You're not supposed to do that. The general instruction of the Roman Missal is very clear. The laity are not to engage in gestures and signs and things that are reserved for the priest. Okay? Simple. Full stop. And now they're doing it at the Vatican, which before Francis, the Vatican had very hard rules about your behavior at Mass. You couldn't receive communion in the hand. Every year, we would see tons of video footage during tourist season, basically, of people filming, mostly Americans, getting denied communion at the Vatican because they would insist on getting it in the hand. As just one example. Until Francis. They changed the rules. The Orans position is in the guidebooks on the Mass as reserved for gestures reserved for the priest. So, Orans posture is this Pater Noster. Yeah, that's enough of that. And Cardinal Todd actually leading the Pater Noster in Latin is actually refreshing, to put it mildly. More of that. So especially from the worst bishops. If they do things in a more traditional way, it may actually influence their thinking a little bit. Now, Raymond Doyo chimed in on this influencer talk because, of course, he did. He's one of the best voices to chime in. He said, there's a lot of talk about influencers at the Vatican this week, but the OG influencers, OG, okay, OG means original gangsta. Okay, that's literally what it means. Spread joy and hope like the apostles. They suffered terribly for their good work. This is the true path of influencing with a heart for truth. Just ask Archbishop Fulton Sheen or the Reverend Mother Angelica. One was banned from preaching in his own diocese for years. The other faced threats to her religious life and community. All before they were reaching hearts others could never touch. You want to be an influencer. Steel yourself with faith and put down the selfie stick now and then. When you're getting kicked from the rear, it means you're in front, says Archbishop Fulton Sheen. Unless you are a thorn in somebody's side, you're not doing Christianity right, says Mother Angelica. Wise words from Raymond Doyo, and those words from modern names that you kind of expect to get canonized sometime in the future. Sort of remind you that you're not supposed to just, as an influencer, just peddle the company line. You're supposed to actually challenge things. And both of them did that. And it makes you wonder why the people who were invited to this influencer thing were largely yes men. They were company men. But of course you know why that was, because it's the Vatican. They want to counter the voices of the Michael Matts, the Taylor Marshalls of the world, which are giving you a different kind of perspective on things going on in Rome, or at least they were until fairly recently. Now, we get this other article here from another media outlet. This is a Catholic media outlet called El País, with the headline, "The Vatican embraces Catholic influencers. We are the gateway to the faith." No, you're not. Okay, hold on. No, you're not. You are not the gateway to the faith. I am sorry, but the faith is a gift. You might be able to help, you might be an instrument through prayer and other things for someone else's conversion, but never elevate yourself so high to think that you are the gateway to the faith as an influencer. Think about what Raymond Doyo said there. Put the selfie stick down for a bit. It's about pride. I have not been the gateway to the faith for anybody. I have heard occasionally from emails from people that they found my content and decided to become Catholic. And every time I get an email like that, I'm flabbergasted. I don't know why, like how that works. But I was not the gateway to the faith for anybody. At best, I may have been an instrument. At best. So please stop elevating yourself this way. God speaks to the heart through other people, and we're just along for the ride. We can cooperate as he wills. This week, Rome welcomes 1,000 creators of religious content on social media. They're attending a jubilee on July 28th and 29th, part of a holy year that focuses on the digital environment. If you want a hint at what I suspect Leo's encyclical is going to be, probably going to be about digital issues, AI, and social media. For all of your rigid traditionalist commentators out there, that should perk your ears up. Some of us have been expecting at some point some kind of chastisement from Rome on the work we do. So don't be shocked if that happens. They are some of the biggest issues facing the church today. This was posted July 29th, 2025. They actually, if you, on my tab, they actually have Pope Francis's name on there, which I don't know why, because he had nothing to do with this. This event is the current pontificate. The event will take place, well, it did on the 28th and 29th, and takes place in a context where data shows that society is becoming less religious. The percentage of Catholics in Spain is just over half of the population, although 18.8% are practicing, according to the latest Center for Sociological Research survey conducted in April. Among those aged under 24, the numbers of believers barely exceeds 1/3, and church weddings are less popular, having declined by almost 39% since 2015. 2 decades ago, 90% of the population considered themselves Catholic. It's a rapid and significant shift. Then it talks about a Twitter nun who says, masses no longer attract young people, not even me. They do have faith, but if they don't go to parishes, it's our fault. We must connect with reality and offer the message of Jesus in a renewed language. And you're getting the idea here. When you see the use of renewed language, that's your synodality talk. Now, I'm going to give you a counter argument for what the nun said. With respect to the nun, I know nothing about her, generally speaking. There is one place young people are attending the Mass in large numbers, and that is any traditional parish, whether it's of the Eastern rites or of the Latin rite. A traditional parish with a traditional liturgy appropriate to that rite, where they teach the faith from the ambo, guess what? The average age of those parishes is much lower than at your typical neighborhood Latin rite parish. Why is that? Because it turns out young people actually are looking for faith. They are looking for the truth. They're just not finding it in your typical Catholic parish. That's a problem, and they're not willing to address it. Now, of course, you will see that the Vatican will not typically give you their condemnations of things directly. So this comes from Catholic.de, mysteriously published right during this at the same time, written by a Father Max Capabianca under the translated headline, "Beware of Catholic influencer fundamentalism." Oh boy. The German bishops, when they publish this stuff, are endorsing the view they're publishing. And for all the bad things the German bishops have done and all the slaps on the wrist they've gotten from the Vatican in the last several years, at the end of the day, the Vatican and the German bishops are on the same side for the most part. It's just that the Vatican's approach to synodal reforms was going around 40 miles an hour in a town road, and the German bishops were wanting to go down that same town road at 95 miles an hour. They just didn't care what kind of wreckage they caused. That was the difference. One's reform at a relatively slow to moderate rate, and the others just wanted to just put the pedal to the metal, blasting "I can't drive 55" and don't care what the consequences were. That's the difference. So here we go. From a priest issuing a warning to Catholics in conjunction with the Jubilee nonsense going on in Rome. The Jubilee of digital missionaries and Catholic influencers is currently taking place in Rome. This has attracted international attention. Titles like "Hot Priests Spread the Faith in the Digital Age" suggest that the Vatican is systematically employing handsome clergy to win new followers. In Germany, the phenomenon of the Catholic influencer is not yet as widespread as elsewhere. It's astonishing to look at Latin America or the USA, for example, and see how individual Catholic figures have millions of followers on Instagram, TikTok, or other platforms. One example is the controversial Bishop Robert Barron, with over 500,000 followers on Instagram alone. The presence of Catholic influencers on social media certainly offers opportunities, and it makes sense to engage in this digital marketplace. However, the danger of becoming too closely aligned with the logic of these platforms, a logic often characterized by polarization, speed, and click counts, should not be ignored. Catholic influencers also operate in a bubble that puts them in competition with evangelical and fundamentalist actors. These rely on provocative content that evokes strong emotional reactions to generate attention. If the Catholic Church relies too heavily on these strategies, there is a risk of losing the depth and understanding of its faith. Algorithms ensure that a broad audience is only seemingly reached. In reality, parallel worlds are created that reinforce one's own positions while simultaneously shielding one from critical questioning of one's own perspective. I'm going to pause here and remind you that it was this week and last week where the Vatican almost certainly had a little bit of influence in the canceling of 3 moderate to conservative post-conciliar seminary theologians who wanted to teach the Catholic faith but didn't challenge any of the reforms of the church until Fiducia Supplicans and Amoris Laetitia. So spare us this dialogue talk and challenging ideas talk. Please spare us. German bishops, ladies and gentlemen, they inadvertently adopt the mechanisms that already characterize the evangelical scene: polarization, echo chambers, and the reduction of faith to catchy statements. You mean like all the synodal jargon they push? Come on. When Catholic influencers operate only within their bubble, the church loses the open dialogue necessary for critical reflection and confronting social challenges. When you see the word critical used these days by anybody, they don't mean like a film critic where they tell you what a movie's about, maybe some of the problems that might be in it, if it's good or bad. Now, the language of criticism, critical in theology, in history, in sociology, in political science, in economics is Marxism. That's what it is. It's challenging the existing structures of things to reform them with the influence of Marxist understandings of power and struggle. That's what it is. He wants critical reflection. That is the language of the critical theorists. It is not Catholic. It's Marxist and it's modernist. This is Catholic fundamentalism in its purest form. Now, your rigid traditionalists are not Catholic anymore. They're just Catholic. A populist, another negative word out of Germany, staging a faith that has little to do with the breadth of authentic Catholic tradition. Because your traditionalists are not authentically traditional. Because if we were, we would be embracing the revolution. Thanks, I hate it. Now, during all this Jubilee, you had some wild stuff being shown. For example, this was posted by Michael Haynes of LifeSite and Per Mariam. The Vatican's Jubilee mascot Luche remains omnipresent around Rome and the Vatican. One such statue is seen today outside shops on the edge of St. Peter's Square. The Vatican seems unfazed by the links of quote-unquote toys used for bedroom activities made by Luche's design company and James Martin type promotion. Yes, this thing is directly linked to the James Martin program. A lot of people defend it anyway, even though the thing is got all the symbolism of synodality on it. But that is one of the weird things. That doesn't hold a candle to the weirdest thing that these guys thought was a good idea to do at a Jubilee for youth. Also from Michael Haynes. The Vatican is currently staging a pop concert for Italian pilgrims in the Jubilee of Youth. Singers are performing on the stage in front of St. Peter's Basilica to the right of the altar. The national groups divide up for different events this week before uniting for key events. Now, I would play this for you with audio, but it's copyrighted. This is a professional pop act of some kind. Their music is copyrighted. YouTube loves to enforce copyright rules. So they're having a pop concert right by the altar at a mass. Because of course they are. That is how you reach out to the youth, don't you know? Doesn't look like a lot's changed in the last few months, has it? The same tone-deaf messaging, the same tone-deaf displays of irreverence and all sorts of things. And around all this is the question of money. We've heard a lot about the Vatican needing money. There have been open talk from cardinals that with Pope Leo XIV, he may be able to reopen the wallets of Americans to give to the Vatican to help with its budget shortfalls. I no longer believe there are budget shortfalls because they have been doing things with money that you would not do if you had a serious budgetary problem. No organization worth its salt who is having a financial problem would do a lot of the things we've seen lately. And I have a story for you today that takes the cake. Because one of the things we've heard from the Holy Father in the last couple of months is repeated invocation of Pope Francis's papal encyclical Laudato Si, which had a sequel called Laudate Deum. What Laudato Si and Laudate Deum were about was a Catholic, put it in quotes or an asterisk next to that, response to questions about the environment. It was the Vatican's full-throated endorsement of the thermometer problem, as we'll call it. It was the church getting on board with a secular program on that. The secular authorities loved it so much that in the aftermath of it, they started holding UN conferences at the Vatican. And secular media were singing the praises of the church. That should be a giant warning to you when the deceptive media are out there embracing the church, and not by conversion. Because it looks like they managed to get the church to convert itself. And we've had this continued singing of praises about this weird document that came out now 10 years ago. This year's the 10th anniversary of that document. To mark the occasion, we go to, weirdly, my own local news channel that I rely on for weather. I was literally checking for a weather report just to see what to expect when I saw this unbelievable story. Go to Coco 5 News out of Oklahoma City. Never thought I'd be Bringing them to you. Headline: Vatican strikes solar farm deal to become the world's first carbon neutral state. Originally published by the Associated Press, and we'll go back to them in a second. The Vatican is broke, they say. Well, they've struck some kind of financial deal with a solar farm to provide all their electricity. And solar power in these kind of deals is not cheaper than your normal grid power. It's not. It's more expensive. So don't believe them anymore when they tell you that they're broke. They're not. It's either they're not broke or they have completely and totally misplaced their priorities for fixing some very basic managerial problems that the Vatican city-state is facing. Now, one of those would be, maybe if you want to bring more money in, start teaching the actual faith. American Catholics are pretty straightforward about this. Teach the actual faith and we'll start donating again. Others say, teach the actual faith and give us back our Latin masses and we'll start donating again. Others say, add on to those two things, get rid of the worst elements in the hierarchy, Cardinal Fernandez and things, and we'll start donating again. But until those things happen, that's probably not going to happen. And the U.S. gives the most money out of anybody. That shouldn't surprise that many people. Number two is like Germany, which also should not surprise anybody. Two of the richest countries in the world provide most of the funding for the Vatican. And until they right their ship, they're not getting any more money. But their behavior is not what you would expect from an organization that keeps assuring us that they are in fact broke. Look at this AP article published by my own local news station for this. If I can get this stupid pop-up to go away. There we go. Italy agreed Thursday to a Vatican plan to turn a 430-hectare field north of Rome, once a source of controversy between the two, into a vast solar farm that the Holy See hopes will generate enough electricity to meet its needs and turn Vatican City into the world's first carbon-neutral state. The agreement stipulates that the development of Santa Maria Galleria site will preserve the agricultural use of the land and minimize the environmental impact on the territory, according to a Vatican statement. Details weren't released, but the Vatican will be exempt from paying Italian taxes to import the solar panels, but won't benefit from the financial incentives that Italians enjoy when they go solar. Italy, for its part, can use the field in its accounting for reaching European Union clean energy targets. Any excess electricity generated by the farm beyond the Vatican's needs would be given to the local community, officials said, speaking on condition of anonymity because the agreement was not public. Vatican officials have estimated it will cost under 100 million euros to develop the solar farm, and that once it is approved by the Italian parliament, the contracts to do the work could be up for bids. Vatican Foreign Minister Archbishop Paul Gallagher signed the agreement with Italy's ambassador to the Holy See, Francesco Dinotti. The Italian parliament must approve the arrangement since it has financial implications for the territory, which holds extraterritorial status in Italy. End quote. So I'm glad the Vatican, who's broke, had $100 million or 114 million US dollars or 100 million euros lying around that they could invest in a solar project instead of just continuing to get their power from the normal Italian grid. When they say they're broke, why should you believe them when they do things like this? There's something as silly as neutrality on emissions. Give me a break. The church has a much bigger problem right now, and that is simply that most Catholics don't believe the basic tenets of the faith that you're required to believe to be a Catholic. Most Catholics in the West don't believe in the real presence. They believe it's a symbol. Most Catholics don't attend Mass anymore. Most Catholics worship politics instead of their Creator. Most Catholics are at best cultural Catholics. And generally speaking, a generation of cultural Catholicism leads to the next generation of that same family not being Catholic at all. And yet they found 100 million euros to go dump into a solar plant somewhere. And I live in an area where you can find these things. If you live in an area where you see solar plants, let me know. You'll see that they are not exactly the best for the environment. How many dead birds have you seen near your solar plants? I see them. They're not the best. Better than windmills. That's not saying much. Misplaced priorities rule the day in Rome now. And they need to fix this. But they aren't going to, because they are committed to the secular program. It's absurd. So don't believe them when they tell you they're broke. They clearly are not. If they were, they would be doing something else. They certainly wouldn't be spending 100 million euros on a vanity project. I'm curious what you think about this. So let me know in the comments, please. Go to the super chat here. KC says, to be fair, there are some popular Catholic podcasters who are pharisaical and lacking charity. We do have to be discerning. Yes, there are. You're not going to get any disagreement from me on that. Trust me on this. But no, this is generally what you would expect to see from the Vatican, unfortunately, is they talk a good game, and when going back to that digital influencer stuff, you'd hear a good game, right? Spread the gospel, don't be divisive, that kind of stuff. But there is this underlying thing about them requiring essentially adherence. And the people they invited are not known for challenging anything going on, at least mostly. All right, folks. Thanks very much for tuning in today. Let me know what you think about all this in the comments, please. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't. It does help. Sharing this on social media helps a lot too. And as always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.